我哋開會啦，我哋有夠鐘有夠。
It's time for us to start our meeting, and we've also formed a quorum. So let's start with this meeting of the panel on constitutional affairs. Item 1 on the agenda, information papers issued since the last meeting. One paper was issued, that is paper CB bracket 2906 bracket 01. Item 2 on the agenda, items for discussion at the next meeting. Please invite the government representatives to come in. I'd like to thank the representatives from the administration. Let me introduce them in one go. Undersecretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Mr. Lau Kong-wah. Principal Assistant Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Ms. An Tang. Chief Electoral Officer, Registration and Electoral Office, Mr. Lee Pak-hong. Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Ms. Jenny Chan. Principal Liaison Officer from the Home Affairs Department, Mr. K.C. Ma. Thank you, all of you, for attending this meeting of the panel. And the Secretary will adjust on item 2 of the agenda, items for discussion at the next meeting. What are the suggestions from the administration? Mr. Chairman would like to discuss 2 issues with members. The first one is the review on the number of elected seats of the 5th District Council election. The other issue is the public hearing on the 3rd report of the Hong Kong SAR to the United Nations under ICCPR. On the second item, that is public hearing on the 3rd report of the Hong Kong SAR in relation to ICCPR to the United Nations. Members, if you have no objection, I'll ask the Secretariat to publish a notice to invite deputations and members of the public to express their views on the 3rd report. Our next meeting will be on the 20th of May. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Mr. Chairman, on the 26th of March, Mr. Ronny Tong wrote to you in relation to Mr. Leung Chun-ying's. Well, can we handle the items for discussion on the 20th of May first? We'll invite deputations and members of the public to attend. Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear you clearly on the first proposed item. Review of the number of elected seats for the 5th term of the district councils. 5th term of the district councils. Review of the number of elected seats. You mean the next term? Yes. Will demarcation of boundaries also be covered? I think we'll only discuss the number of elected seats, which will be adjusted. Mr. Lau? In the next term, if the LegCo so approves, there won't be any more appointed seats. The planning department will submit changes in population to us, and we'll have to examine whether we should maintain the existing number of seats or should there be increases and decreases. So panel members can express their views on the number of seats. Well, Mr. Chairman, there will be related issues. Whether or not there will be an increase or decrease in the number of seats. Demarcation is one issue to be discussed, and the roles and functions of the district councils as well. We shouldn't have a fragmented discussion on the number of seats only. I don't know the plan of the administration. Should we have an overall discussion? Under Secretary, a few meetings ago, we discussed the roles and functions of the district councils. Apparently, this panel would like to refer the issue to the Home Affairs panel. That would be more appropriate. This time, we'll only handle the number of elected seats. Mr. Chairman, we also discussed the demarcation of the boundaries of the constituencies. Mr. Chairman, to separate these items among various panels is not ideal. So next time we won't discuss demarcation, we'll only discuss the number of seats. Well, Mr. Chairman, that's not very good. You know that at many meetings, members already expressed their wish to discuss that issue. I understand the position of your political party. We should not have fragmented discussions. Well, they are not suggesting demarcation because there are procedures to follow on demarcation. The administration alone cannot decide on demarcation. So at the next meeting, they'd like to discuss the number of seats first. The roles and functions of the district councils come under the Home Affairs Bureau. So there's nothing I can do. Oh, there's nothing you can do. Mr. To, Mr. Chairman, unless we have new development areas, then we'll have new seats. Otherwise, if we don't have new development areas, the increase and decrease of number of seats will lead to redemarcation. Last time when we discussed the bill, they told us that we should not discuss demarcation. They narrowed down the discussion only to the number of seats. Can the administration tell us very clearly what they would like to discuss at the next meeting? Otherwise, next time when we ask certain issues, they say the issue should not be discussed. Under Secretary, basically, next time we should discuss the number of elected seats. Precisely as Mr. To said, we should discuss the number of seats first, the proportion, the number of seats first, and then we'll assimilate the results of that discussion. Then the next step is, after looking at the figures, we can proceed to this demarcation discussion. There are two types of demarcation. One is demarcation of the constituencies. The other is demarcation of administrative districts, as some members proposed. So we must finish the first step first. Members should rest assured that there will be time for discussing demarcation. Roles and demarcation is the work of the EAC, not the work of our Bureau. I understand that the EAC will conduct a formal open consultation on the subject. Mr. Chairman, I hope that the Undersecretary will not look at the issue from a fragmented position. Roles and functions of the district councils, demarcation, number of seats, etc., are all interrelated. So next time, the Undersecretary should have a broad discussion with us. He should not narrow down the scope of our discussions. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm only adopting a step-by-step approach. Well, we'll do it step by step then. All right. On the agenda of the next meeting, if members have no other comments, I'll hand the floor over to Mr. Dennis Kwok. Well, Mr. Chairman, just now I mentioned that on the 26th of March, Mr. Ronny Tong wrote to you about the report that Mr. C.Y. Leung, the CE, notified the Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office Director, Mr. Wang Guangya, before the implementation of the BSA. BSD. Well, I understand that Mr. Ronny Tong has submitted an oral question on the subject. Should we wait till the oral question was asked? The oral question will be asked on the 17th of April. Members, do you think we need a special meeting to invite the CE to come and explain to us why the CE should have notified the Hong Kong Macau office director, Mr. Wang Guangya, in relation to buyer stamp duty? Mr. Yip Kok Him, well, Mr. Chairman, I don't think a special meeting is necessary. I think we can just put it as one of our discussion items. As you mentioned, Mr. Ronny Tong has already submitted an oral question on the subject. I think we should wait and see whether Mr. Ronny Tong is satisfied with the administration's reply. Any other comments? Should we do this? The 17th of April will come very soon. It's day after tomorrow. So I think we should read the written reply first and see whether we're satisfied. Otherwise, at our meeting on the 20th of May, we can discuss whether or not we should put that item as one of our discussion items. We don't actually need a special meeting. Do members agree? If you agree, that will be the procedure. Let's proceed to item 3 on the agenda. Date for postponed or adjourned elections of the district councils, the Legislative Council and village representatives. The paper has already been distributed to members. And the Secretary, would you please take us through the paper briefly? Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the present laws, 3 elections will be postponed under inclement weather or riots. And then another date will be fixed within 14 days for the election. The third scenario is about casting of votes and counting of votes. If there's any irregularity, another election has to be convened within 2 days. There is inconsistency between the 2 scenarios or 2 categories of scenarios. It's extremely difficult to conduct another poll in 2 days' time. So we'd like to implement amendments as soon as possible so that for all 3 scenarios, new arrangements should be made in 14 days' time. This is a very simple change.
Mr. Yip Kok Him, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. It's a question of consistency. Reasons. I don't know why there are these 3 cases. But when we look at overseas experience, there are cases where there is an epidemic and such an arrangement will also be in place. Why is it that epidemic is not included in these circumstances? Now, in para 4 of the paper is that from overseas experience, this is a factor too. Now, my second point, we want to change it to from 2 days to 14 days. I have a question. Why is the period so long? Why is it not held on the following Sunday? Now, in an election, we would be doing intensified work during the last period. Say the election expenses would already have been spent up to the date of the election. Then I think 2 weeks is too long. Have you considered that? So from that angle, 14 days may not be that appropriate. your reason is that 2 days are not good enough because you have to take into consideration the supply of electoral staff from the civil service and so on. So you still want to stick to a Sunday, is that right? So if that is the case, why are we not setting it at 7 days instead of 14 days? Yes, Undersecretary. Yes, I would like to defer to Mr. Lee of the REO. Mr. Lee. Thank you, Chairman. On the second question, the legislation is this. It is said that the postponement should last until a certain time, say because of inclement weather, riot, and so on. So the postponement is up to 14 days. It doesn't mean that it should be held on exactly the 14th day. Now, in the past, the REO assumes that the election will be held 7 days later, and we're going to stick with a Sunday to facilitate voters' turnout. So that's what we've been practicing. So 14 days is really to provide more flexibility. Say if a riot lasts for longer than 7 days, and then 14 days requirement would be good. Now, as for epidemic, under existing legislation, there is no provision. But then in the regulations, there are 3 circumstances. Now, for B is riot, open violence, or other occurrence of public danger. So if there are occurrences of public danger, then that is going to be covered. Now, for condition C, an occurrence which appears to be a material irregularity relating to the election, there is no concrete definition under that, and it provides flexibility. Now, if there is a disease outbreak which might lead to material irregularity, then we will look at the specific situation, and that I think that kind of circumstances might fall under this particular condition. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lee. So it doesn't mean that we have to do it on the 14th day, is that right? So it's just within 14 days. Is that right? So if that is the case, then I don't have any more objectionable comments. I think we should hold it as soon as possible and not necessarily on the 14th day. Because the details or the wordings of the regulation is not here, so I won't be able to interpret it the way you did. But if epidemic falls under the circumstances specified as well, so can I confirm this point again, Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee's understanding of the 14 days is correct. That's the maximum period. Now, as for the epidemic, that's my personal interpretation or thinking of how the regulations should apply. Now, as to what will be the actual interpretation of the situation, we would have to see the real situation on whether the epidemic is going to cause material irregularity. We'll have to look at the actual situation to see whether we can invoke the power to postpone the election. Well, actually, in the past, we haven't been invoking that phrase or clause to postpone an election. So if a member is concerned about epidemic, then perhaps I would go back and discuss with the DOJ colleagues to see how epidemic can be covered under these 3 circumstances. Okay, please go back and study it. Yes, Mr. Martin Liao, next. Thank you, Chairman. I tend to agree with Mr. Yip. Up to 14 days is not very appropriate because a candidate will sort of focus his effort to push his support level to the highest or to the peak on the day of the election. So if an election is going to be held 14 days later, then that is going to affect the results of the election. Now, Mr. Lee said that within 14 days, and it can be held on the 14th day. So my view is that the election should be held as soon as possible. Yes, Ms. Helena Wong, Chairman, we don't have any comment on this, on the postponement up to 14 days. And actually, you haven't really invoked the clause in the past. Why was 2 days originally drawn up? Was the condition different then, or is your interpretation of the clause different now? Yes, Ms. Tang. These regulations were drawn up in 1993, the 2-day and 14-day regulations. When we looked at the situation then and at a Bills Committee discussion, and they originally thought that the postponement the election can be held within 14 days. But then taking into consideration that the ballot boxes may be missing and other circumstances. So after this deliberations, the Bills Committee added this requirement of 2-day postponement for cases of immaterial irregularity. Now, after 1997, the relevant regulations have been incorporated into the election regulations, and so far we haven't really been using that clause in actual practice. Now, the YEC and the REO have looked at the clauses again, and then they found that there are a lot of difficulties in implementing the 2-day rule. So we would like to sort of change it to 14-day. Anything to add from you, Mrs. Helena Wong? Yes, Mr. Raymond Wong next. Chairman. We've got only the paper provided by the administration, but we haven't got a background brief from the Secretariat giving us information to assess the case or the situation independently. Now, in the past, the Secretariat used to provide some background brief for us. Now, in principle, I don't object to the proposal. As for an occurrence of a material irregularity, the change in the number of days in the postponement from 2 to 14 so that it is in line with the other circumstances, and that's all right. Now, I want to clarify. 14 days. Is it within 14 days? In paragraphs 7 to 11 on the paper, the administration mentions many difficulties. Normally you would hold elections on a Sunday. So I think if that is the case, you would have to decide on whether the election should be held consistently 14 days later. Now, as for the constraints in venues and logistic arrangements and so on, now in paragraph 4 and 5 of talking about overseas experience, all the examples are not related to what you are proposing or the crux of the matter, whether it is an occurrence of a material irregularity. It is not relevant to the proposal that we are now looking at. Now, if we are going to take reference from overseas, so you have to also look at the scale of the elections, the population, the number of voters, and so on. And so these overseas experiences are grossly irrelevant to us, and I don't think it's meaningful to quote these references. Now, so can you confirm it's within 14 days? Yes, it is. Yes, Secretariat, can you tell me why a background brief is not provided? And actually, we've looked into the case, and we've looked at whether there are cases of DC categorical elections which have to be postponed because of an occurrence of material irregularity. There are no such cases, so that's why we haven't come up with a background brief. Next, Miss Emily Lau. I have 2 questions. First, Mr. Lee started talking about this. If it is going to be postponed, it's going to be held on a Sunday, but not necessarily so. Well, now, here comes the question. Now, for some countries, people have a holiday when there are elections, so as to ensure that the voters actually turn out for the elections. Now, actually, on Sundays in Hong Kong, a lot of people still have to go to work. Now, if we're going to postpone the elections and it's not going to be held on a Sunday, then that would create a lot of problems. So my suggestion is we're going to hold it on a Sunday, or we'll let people off have a holiday so that they can go to voting. Now, on the venues, we've had some lengthy discussions on the venues. A lot of voters said that the venues are not that convenient as far as access is concerned, and the administration has been telling us that there are difficulties in finding suitable venues, and they allow you to use it for a very short time only. And so this time round, you say that if you are people are reassigned to different polling stations, and that's going to be creating a lot of problems as well. So what are you going to do as far as venues are concerned? Now, on your first question, our normal practice is to hold it on a Sunday. Now, the regulations say that it should be held within 14 days, but as I explained, we would normally choose in the Sunday following, on the Sunday following to hold the election again. That's our normal practice. Now, if we're going to hold an election on a weekday, then that is going to create a lot of inconvenience, and that won't be good at all. Now, as for the venues for polling, now we do have difficulties in finding suitable venues. This is because a venue should be of a sizable area, and normally schools are more appropriate because there are a number of schools in Hong Kong, and they normally have a hall which can be used for polling and counting. So in the past, around 60% of the polling stations are within or are situated in schools. Now, if there is an occurrence of material irregularity under the existing regulation, we have to hold it within 2 days, then that's going to create a lot of problems, because schools won't be able to rent out their school premises for us to use them as polling stations. So that's exactly because of this that we want to standardize the postponement period at 14 days. This is exactly what we want to achieve. Yes, Ms. Emily Lau?
That means there's not much flexibility. So it's either a postponement of 1 week or 2 weeks. That is to the following Sunday or the next Sunday. I think you have to write this very clear into the law. If it is to be on a weekday, then you have to make it a public holiday. In future, just in case you get into that sort of trouble, you really have to write that very clear into the law. As for venues, even if you have a postponement of 1 week or 2 weeks, you may not be able to find suitable venues, like schools. So I believe you have to tackle that as well. Mr. Lee, Mr. Chairman, let me supplement. When we organize an election, when we try to identify venues, usually we'll discuss with the owner of the venues just in case there's to be a postponement of a week, with the venues concerned to be available on the following Sunday. Well, originally it's just 2 days, Mr. Chairman. Why the following Sunday or the next Sunday? I don't understand. Mr. Lee, do you mean a backup date? Well, Mr. Chairman, I was referring to the 14-day statutory requirement. We have 500 odd polling stations for the electoral election, and we'll ask the venue owner whether or not the venue is available on the following Tuesday and the following Sunday. Well, most venues will not be available on the following Tuesday, but available on the following Sunday. Well, you said that you would ask the venue owners whether the following Sunday would be available. So why do you have to come to us? Well, under the existing requirements, it may be on the following Tuesday, and most schools will not be available on the following Tuesday. Then there will be a factor of uncertainty. That's why we're now asking for a standardized postponement of 14 days at most. Then even for the VR election, we can postpone it by 14 days. Mr. Chairman, if the election is to be postponed to the following Sunday or a public holiday, then so long as most members of the public can cast their votes, it doesn't matter. However, after the 8-week electoral period has lapsed, that means after the peak is over, well, the peak is over for everybody, of course. If suddenly the election period is to be lengthened by 1 week or 2 weeks, the situation may change. You see, many candidates have been saying that they have crises. Now, I'm very worried about the 3 scenarios put forward for postponement. I'm very worried. Now, in 1993, we had a black rainstorm warning. Wooden planks had to be paved on the roads, etc., etc. There was serious flooding, but the polling rate was 58%. In 2004, in one Hong Kong Island polling station, there was shortage of ballot boxes. We lost by just several hundred votes, and we complained against you. Still, the impact would be huge to have to conduct the poll again. Now, the second categories of scenario, riot. Would you stop or suspend the election and postpone it by 14 days just because of a riot? Well, I'm not that worried about the postponement of 14 days. Rather, I'm worried about the 3 types of scenarios for postponement. Can you tell us very clearly under what circumstances would you stop the poll? And when you stop the poll, what about the votes already cast? Will they be counted? Will the electors concerned be allowed to vote again during the postponed election, or will lock up all the ballot boxes? And what about the electoral forums? Usually, they're held 5 days before the election. Now that there are to be 2 more weeks, should the media launch electoral forums again? You have to tell us all these details. Mr. Lee? I fully understand Ms. Ho's worries, Mr. Chairman. In fact, Ms. Ho does not have to be worried. Prima facie, these 3 scenarios are very relaxed. But in fact, in the past, we had never postponed an election. In 1998, there was serious flooding, but we did not postpone the election. In 2004, we did not postpone the election either. We'll be very careful in postponing an election. it's only when an election really cannot go on that will postpone the election. And the existing laws do stipulate that the voting time after postponement should not be less than the original voting time. For example, for electoral elections and district council elections, there should be 15 hours of polling. So even with the postponement, the statutory requirement is that there must be at least 15 hours of polling. And if there is to be a postponement, those voters who have already cast their votes need not vote again. At the moment, there are very stringent provisions in the existing laws in relation to these scenarios. I'd like Mr. Lee to undertake that is under very exceptional circumstances that he'll postpone an election. And I'd like to know what will be defined as exceptional circumstances. Say if the election is suspended at 3 p.m., will the postponed election start at 3 p.m. only, or will he start again early in the morning? Mr. Lee, should it be 3 p.m. or 4 p.m.? It depends. Say if the postponement is due to inclement weather, once the inclement weather is over, we can resume polling. Now, I cannot say anything on behalf of the EAC. This is the right of the EAC, the prerogative of the EAC. In 1999, there was this black rainstorm warning. We only assigned the electors in that polling station concerned to other polling stations. From the viewpoint of the electors, that will be the most suitable arrangement. Well, under what circumstances will we suspend an election? Black rainstorm warning, amber rainstorm warning, red rainstorm warning, or typhoon signals? Well, if the electors cannot go to the polling stations, they cannot leave their home, etc., then the election may have to be postponed. First round, any more? No? Then Dr. Helena Wong asking for a second time. Mr. Chairman, in 2017, there will be universal suffrage for the CE election. Now, what about the CE election? Here only the electoral election, district council election, and VR election are mentioned. Why not the CE election also? Is it that the administration envisages that there won't be universal suffrage for the CE election? Under Secretary, the existing ordinance only regulates the electoral, district council, and village representative elections. At the moment, we don't have a large-scale election for the CE election. Dr. Helena Wong mentioned the CE election in 2017. Later, on electoral methods and concerns of members, will put forth a number of proposals on which pieces of legislation need be amended. That's very important. Dr. Helena Wong, so you present another proposal independently to us on CE election. Well, when we discuss universal suffrage for the CE election, that may be a very important element to discuss. Now, for postponement of 14 days, in the interim, will campaign activities, electioneering activities be allowed? because there may be a problem in relation to expenses. Some candidates may have spent all their statutory expenses. Others may have remaining expenses for publicity. Then there may be unfairness. Mr. Lee, if an election is postponed, the ceiling for electoral expenses will remain unchanged. Concerning Dr. Helena Wong's question, the simple answer is that the ceiling for electoral expenses will not change. So if a candidate has not exhausted his campaign expenses, then he can continue with his publicity. Dr. Helena Wong, that means some candidates can reserve certain funds for a postponed election. Mr. Lee, under the existing statutory arrangements, it's stipulated very clearly under what circumstances there should be a postponement and by how much. So candidates should know the restrictions. Up to this moment, we've not postponed any election. Mr. Wong Yok Man, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a very simple question. I understand the difficulties spelled out in paragraphs 7 to 11. The impact on poll count is relatively slight when compared with casting of votes. Now, if we accept your suggestions and you are to implement these amendments, will all the difficulties set out in paragraphs 7 to 11 be automatically resolved? Mr. Lee, Mr. Chairman, in paragraphs 7 to 11, we do say that if the postponement is by 2 days, we'll have actual difficulties. Paragraph 7 is about venues. If we are to postpone an election by 14 days, we'll have more flexibility for making arrangements. So we must allow for flexibility in terms of venues. Well, some schools or many schools will be able to let us use their school campus on Sundays. So we're confident that all the 500-odd venues can be used again as polling stations. In the past, for electoral election, we had to recruit 20,000 odd staff members. If an election is to be postponed to the following Tuesday or Sunday, we have to ask whether or not these staff members are able to help. Well, some may tell us that they're available on Tuesday but not on Sunday or vice versa. Anyway, we're confident, we have to be confident that we can recruit sufficient staff.
Now, as for the logistic arrangements, now if an occurrence of material irregularity happens, we don't know the nature yet. And if we're going to hold the election within 2 days, it may be very possible that such irregularity is not resolved. So we hope that the amendment can reduce our risk in that regard. Now, if the irregularity cannot be mended or resolved within 2 days, then we will run into great difficulties if we hold the election within 2 days. Next, Ms. Sit Ho. I object to raising the ceiling on the election expenses on the basis that there is going to be a postponement of the election. So that would be very unfair to some candidates. And what I am afraid of is that the administration will collude with some certain candidates in that regard. Now, I want to raise this again. If we suspend the election at 3 p.m. and some people have to go to work on Sunday, they have to go to work in the morning and they can only vote in the afternoon. So I want to remind or alert members that if an election is going to be suspended, then if it is going to resume the election on another day, the timing for resuming the polling station should start at exactly the same time when the election was suspended. So that would make it possible for people to vote within the time they find it convenient. Yes, Mr. Lee, have you got that? Yes, right? Okay, all right. Mr. Yip Kwok Him, I don't have much opinion yet, but I have reservation on Ms. Sit-ho's suggestion. We hope to provide convenience to the voters, and that's our number one consideration. So if the polling stations resume at an hour where the polling station was closed last time, does it really work? I think there's a problem with that kind of suggestion. But of course, members can still deliberate on that point. But I just want to raise my view. So there are two different opinions. So if an election is if the voting is suspended, what time will it resume in the postponed voting exercise? Ms. Sit-ho, I'm open as to when the voting should resume. Now, Mr. Yip, can you tell me concretely what is your concern? Now, my suggestion is that I would like to facilitate those who go off work and then they can vote after they have gone off work. So the total voting time should be 15 hours, respectively. Now, Mr. Yip doesn't seem to be very strong in his objection. Yes, Mr. Martin Liao? Chairman, I just want to clarify. Now, circumstances B, open violence. Well, open violence might not happen in each and every district. Are you going to suspend the voting in one district only and not other district where there is no open violence? No, Chairman, this is not the case. The regulations say provide several conditions or cases. Now, if the open violence affects all the voting stations or polling stations, then we will have to suspend all the voting exercise. Now, if a certain polling station is affected by open violence, that particular polling station will be closed. So in this kind of circumstance, we have to get instruction from the CE. Now, if we're talking about just one polling station, then the presiding officer of that polling station will have the say on whether to close the station if there is open violence. Now, it seems that the amendment is relatively simple. It's just a change of figure, right? So you will be coming back to us again, and if needed, we may also establish a subcommittee to look at this. Now, Emily Lau, yes, please, can you ask them to consult the public as well? Of course, Chairman, you're right. We will be setting up a subcommittee to look into it. But then if the administration can conduct some consultation, then that would be good. Then we can take that as reference in our subcommittee, in our discussion. Now, all right, if we have a subcommittee, we can consult the public. Now, when are you going to table the bill to us? Any timetable? We will do it as soon as we can. We don't have a fixed time frame. Let's see if we can do it within this year. All right, so much for this agenda item. The fourth agenda item is on the election of the electrical election forums. There are two papers. One is provided by the administration. The other is a background brief. Yes, under or an information note from the Secretariat. Under Secretary, the EAC is an independent statutory body, and it handles elections openly, fairly, and honestly. And the guidelines talk about election forums. After September 2012, we have received a number of complaints. It's higher in number than the past. So today, we're here to listen to members' views on election forums, on the way it is conducted, the hosting organization, and so on, because members do have first-hand experience on this kind of election forums. So we want to reflect your views or convey your views to the EAC. Now, I would like to defer to Mr. Lee Pak-hong of the REO to take us through the paper, especially the figures. Mr. Lee? Thank you, Chairman. As what the Undersecretary said, this paper aims to seek members' views on the guidelines on the holding of election forums by broadcasters for electoral elections. Under existing legislation, the EAC issues election guidelines. In June 2012, it issued the latest guidelines for electoral elections. In Chapter 11, sets out the principle of fair and equal treatment, guidelines on election broadcasting on the radio and television, media reporting on election-related matters, and holding of election forums. The relevant organizations should give fair and equal treatment to all candidates. There are three requirements under this principle, and that is the TV or radio station should invite all candidates or list of candidates of the same constituency. Second, the programs should ensure that each of the candidates and list of candidates will be introduced and reported in the program. And third, they should ensure that no favorable or unfavorable treatment will be given to any of the candidates or lists of candidates. The program presenter, guests, and the editor and the audience can freely express their opinion insofar as they are fair comments and based on true facts. The guidelines didn't give concrete requirements on production of these programs. The broadcasters used to have to abide by the principle of equal time principle. That is, the candidates are given equal time in speaking. But after taking into account the feedbacks in past elections, the EAC has since the 2011 District Council election amended and relaxed the requirement. Now, after the amendment, the guidelines require only that broadcasters give fair and equal treatment to candidates, and they don't mandate the equal time principle, so that TV stations and radio stations can have more flexibility in running these programs. Now, on the election forums hosted by broadcasters, under the first principle of fair and equal treatment, it requires that all lists of candidates competing in the same constituency should be invited. Second, during the election forum, each list of candidates should be given equal time to present his or its election forum. The EAC has received a total of a number of complaints during the 2012 electoral elections, and some of them said that there were unfair and inappropriate statements being made. Actually, 38 of them. It was about the conduct of election forums organized by broadcasters, as compared with only 3 complaints relating to the election in 2008, the electoral election. Now, there is no evidence to suggest that the concerned election forums by broadcasters have caused unfairness. We noted that there has been an increase in the number of complaints. We noted the government has given feedback on such election forums. We think that there are 2 issues which are worth looking into. First, whether there is a need for guidelines to be specifically drawn up to regulate the production and broadcasting arrangements. Now, we have to look at we note that there are many different ways of conducting election forums. And if we are to draw up a specific guidelines, then it would be very difficult. Now, we also have to look at whether adverse impact will be created on the editorial freedom or production flexibility of these programs. So I would like to listen to members' views on how to strike a balance between the two. Now, secondly, under existing regulations, the broadcasters should invite all the candidates in the same constituency. Now, this requirement is aimed at giving free, fair and equal treatment to all candidates so that these parties have this equal opportunity to present their views. Now, there are cases where there are so many candidates in one constituency, and then because of this, that would infringe on the freedom of the election forums, and also only limited time would be given to each candidate or list of candidates. Now, if we are to withdraw that requirement, would it give rise to the fact that those less well-known candidates would not be given equal opportunity in attending the election forums to present their election forums, and that would also create unfairness in the election? So this is something that we should contemplate about. Now, in the 2015 and 2017 election cycle, we would be comprehensively reviewing the guidelines, and we would conduct a comprehensive consultation to amend the guidelines, and we would collect the public views and channel them to the EAC so that they can take these views into consideration when forming the new guidelines. So there are altogether 10 members who wish to speak. Now, the order is this: Wong Yuk-man, Chen Chi-chun, Yip Kin-yuen, Helena Wong, Alice Mack, Leung Kwok-ong, Anne Zhang, Emily Lau, Sid Ho, Paul Chair. 5 minutes each, please. Mr. Raymond Wong. Thank you, Chairman. I was once a moderator of the 95, 98, and 2000 electrical election forums. So many members had dealings with me in the past. Now, the flexibility of the guidelines in those days was even higher. Now, according to what Mr. Lee said, well, what you said was really, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, you are seeking advice from us, and you are giving us views, and you said that we have received 38 complaints as compared to 6 complaints in the past. So I don't think that is a very high jump, serious problem here. Now you can ask the ICAC or the EAC how many cases, complaint cases they have. It has nothing to do with the election forums. The rise in the number of figures, complaint cases. Now, in paragraph 14a(b), I think these 2 points are conflicting with each other. I don't think that there is a need to raise these points. All you need to say is a fair and equal treatment, and that should suffice in protecting the interest of the candidates. Now, we have the other regulations like the ECICO, which can give protection in other regards. So, you haven't the standards for the print media as well. Now, Apple Daily and Wenwei Pao, they are at the 2 extreme ends of the political spectrum. Now, so
there are 2 suggestions here. You say that some people claim. I don't know what that means. A, you should respect the production and broadcasting freedom of the broadcasters, and the starting point is freedom of speech. As you said, the hosts and guests can express their opinion. There may be pressure on the candidates, there may be sarcastic remarks about the candidates, etc., etc., and complaints may result. Well, UK, USA, Canada, Macau are mentioned as examples in not inviting all candidates to election forums. Yes, if there are too many candidates, each may not even get 3 minutes. It depends on how the host is to handle the situation. That's not equal treatment. Well, Dr. Chong Lai-wan may express herself very eloquently. You may not necessarily lose to Dr. Priscilla Leung. If you say that not all candidates need to be invited, then there's nowhere we can go. This proposal is absurd. In other jurisdictions, they have laws to regulate political parties. They have stringent provisions about political parties, and they also have statutory provisions to protect political parties. But here in Hong Kong, we do not have a party law, and most media are controlled by the big consortia. You cannot tell me that since there are 38 complaints, many more than the last term, so you're proposing these restrictions. You have to identify where you can make improvement. There are claims that election forums can be cut up into different sessions. Why different sessions? Why don't you just lengthen the forum? Say if I always like to ask questions of Dr. Chong Lai-wan, but then by balloting, I'm never in the same session as she, then what can I do? So I think you only need to state the principle of fair and equal treatment. Don't waste our time. Don't waste your own effort. You don't need to create something unnecessary. Next, Mr. Chen Chi-chun. Mr. Chairman, I also agree that it will be a waste of time. We now have the fair and equal treatment principle in the guidelines, but in terms of actual implementation, it's difficult. In paragraph 11, we learn that a total of 237 complaints have been received, but only one was handled very formally. I just want to know what mistake the media made in that particular case. And then in paragraph 8, it says that the guidelines also make it clear that the fair and equal treatment principle does not apply to programs which are not election-related. Candidates or lists of candidates are free to take part as guests in these programs insofar as their participation is pertinent. Say if a candidate is a doctor and is hosting a certain program, under paragraph 8, can he continue to host the program? Besides, it is very difficult to formulate rules and regulations for ordinary productions like game shows or variety shows. I also lodged complaints, though not upheld. In the afternoon, the commercial radio had a variety show, and then they called up the residents to see whether or not they know where Long May Beach was. And only upon the first call, they already said that they could not locate the villagers. On the following day, they succeeded in fetching me and Mr. James Tian. Mr. James Tian was given more than 10 minutes, while I only got 10 odd seconds. So who will define the nature of the programs? And then there's another problem. When the host assigns the questions, there's a degree of unfairness. Some questions may be asking for information. Your answer may be right or wrong. If I ask you which 3 areas will be covered in Northeast Anti-Development, if you say wheelchair instead of pink chair, then you're wrong. But there are questions with no right or wrong answers. So should all these come under regulation? Mr. Lee? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chan asked 3 questions. Of the 237 complaints, our investigation is nearing completion. Of the 237 complaints, we only spotted 1 case of irregularity up to this moment. It's not convenient for me to disclose the details. Will the information be disclosed? No, we'll not disclose the information. We've handled the complaint and have sent a reply to the complainant, but the details of the case will not be made known to the public. Well, personal data are involved, and secondly, the irregularity was technical. Under the existing guidelines, you have to publicize the names of the other candidates as well. But that was not done. The relevant organization did not disclose the particulars of all the candidates. Well, I think in future we'll be more careful. Paragraph 8 of the paper spells out programs that are not election related. As a matter of judgment, it depends on the content and nature of the program before we can decide if it is election related. If a candidate belongs to a particular profession during the election period, if he has to attend certain functions, should he attend all functions? If the function is related to his profession, then he may do so. Paragraph 11.3 of the guidelines stipulate that if a candidate attends a certain function in his professional capacity, he has to be careful. Mr. Chairman, can I go on? Yes. If a doctor is an authority on epidemics and he is very famous in Hong Kong, if a certain program needs an expert on the subject, then I don't think just because the doctor has become a candidate, he cannot attend any of these programs. So the stipulation is clear. If it is not election related, but it is essential for you to attend the function, we'll allow it. Under the principle of fair and equal treatment, no party can give unfair publicity to a particular candidate. So for every election, we'll view the cases from that angle. Mr. Wong Yuk-man already said that we had no predetermined stance on this issue. The guidelines underwent a public consultation before the 2008 District Council election. Our decision will have to be based on public opinion. We're not saying that any guidelines are problematic. We're not saying that 38 complaints are a problem. But if certain provisions are not clear in the laws concerned, then it's worthwhile for us to listen to public views, and we'll also go back to the EAC. So in future, there will be a public consultation, and all stakeholders in society can express their views. It's only after considering all views received that we'll promulgate the guidelines. Next, Mr. Ip Kin Yuen. Mr. Chairman, concerning the content of the consultation, I agree that we should give more freedom to the producers. Besides, it is not necessary to have more specific guidelines. For a higher degree of freedom, at present there's a very important principle that links up the whole issue. That is, fair and equal treatment principle. But this principle alone will not suffice. Another salient aspect of the discussion is that electors should understand the differences among different candidates so that they can make informed choices. Otherwise, even if you have a fair and equal treatment principle, you won't be able to understand the differences among various candidates. I think we all want a functional election. Well, in one constituency, there was no rival. And just on one election forum, candidates were given sufficient opportunity to express their views. But when it comes to the election forums with 10 odd teams, each person can speak for 1 odd minute only. And then as a result, almost all candidates spare no effort in smearing their rivals. However, that's not what the electors need. What the electors want is that every candidate will be given ample time to explain his platform to the electors. Otherwise, the electors won't be able to make a rational and wise choice. Now, in some jurisdictions, I observed one arrangement that is worthy of consideration. For example, if a candidate fails to get even 1% of support in a popularity poll, then an election forum does not have to invite that candidate to attend. In the last election, such candidates were still invited to election forums. Now these candidates stood to benefit because huge campaign expenses or publicity expenses were shared by him while their popularity rates were low. So we have to consider how we can make election forums avenues for electors to understand the viewpoints of the candidates.
Dr. Helena Wong, thank you, Chairman. I welcome this paper to discuss how we can implement fair and equal treatment principle in our election. This paper focuses only, however, on election forums. I hope that the administration can give us a paper giving a comprehensive review on how to uphold a fair and open and honest election. Now, there are areas which are not covered by the document. Say in some left-wing papers, just a day or two before the election, they would publish news reports attacking the candidates from the non-establishment camps. And there was nothing much that these candidates can do in retaliation. And they spent, let's say, like half a page in smearing these candidates. And all these didn't go into be counted towards the election expenses. So this is grossly unfair. So I hope that you can come up with a paper talking about how to conduct fair and equitable elections for the DC, LegCo, and so on. Now, I had some personal experience in this regard. Wen Mei Pao and Dai Kung Pao published reports attacking me a day or two before the election. So how are you going to resolve these issues? Now, in paragraph 8 of the paper, fair and equal treatment principle does not apply to programs which are not election-related. Lists of candidates are free to take part as guests in these programs insofar as our participation is pertinent. Now, many electronic media take sides, and they invite only the pro-establishment candidates to go onto the programs. They invite them to these programs to talk about not about election, but environment, education, housing, healthcare, and so on. So you would not be able to conduct to give fair and equal treatment because their rivals will not be able to get the same treatment as them. Some candidates do get the support from the electronic media. So how are you going to take that into account? Are you not calculating these appearances towards election expenses? Now, as for paragraph 6, I support the principle outlined there. In the last election, some candidates chose not to appear on the program, and because they didn't appear, then some of the election forums had to be cancelled. Now, for an election forum that I attended, there was also this problem. Now, some people strategically refused to appear in election programs so that their opponents would not have a chance to appear or get exposure because the election forums were cancelled. So, in paragraph 16, I opposed the proposals that detailed guidelines should be given on the conducting election forums. I don't think that we should give details on the production design or hosting style of election forums. Mr. Lee, any response from you? I would like to speak on the last point. If I understood you correctly, Mrs. Helena Wong, you were saying that if some candidates deliberately chose not to appear in an election forum, then the election forum would be cancelled, and then their rivals would not have a chance to appear in public. Is that right? Right. Now, if that is the case, we have also received some complaints like this. Now, if an organization organizes an election forum and invites, say, all the 5 candidates in a constituency, now that organizer, if 1 or 2 candidates agree to appear, then the organizer is entitled to still go ahead with the election forum. So that shouldn't be a problem. Some people may complain that this is unfair, but the complaint cannot be substantiated because the invitation has been extended to all candidates. So the organizer under such circumstance can go on with organizing the election forum. Now, if an organization decides not to go ahead with the forum because some candidates do not appear, it's up to the organization to make that decision. Ms. Alice Mack. In an election forum, all the candidates have to be treated equally. The organizer, say, if the organizer is given the freedom to choose which candidates to invite and which candidates not to invite, then that's not fair to the candidates. During election period, even if you don't mention the word election in a program, then actually that should count towards the election expenses. But I'm worried that if in an election forum not all the candidates are invited, then that's very unfair to the candidates. Now, if you say you are going to give guidelines on the production design and hosting style and so on and so forth, then that won't work either because the candidates will know how to circumvent the requirements. Candidates are well aware of the stance of the broadcasters and the way they are conducting election forums. So I don't think we should come up with detailed guidelines on the way of conducting the election forums. We should not go into the details. Now, the more detailed you make the guidelines, the more complaints you are likely to receive. I don't think less complaints will be received because you've come up with detailed guidelines. Now, I agree with Mr. Wang Yongman. The large number of complaint cases stems from the fact that actually more voters or more people are watching the election forums. So, I don't think we should, because of the high number of complaints, give detailed or draw up detailed guidelines. Yes, Mr. Lam Kwok Hong, next. We should impose a condition on the TV media that they should provide a certain period of time, and then each candidate should be given equal time. So even if there are many lists of candidates in one constituency, they should be given equal time as the candidates in a constituency with fewer candidates. They should be obliged to give time to the candidates so that voters can have an informed choice in electing or in election. If a media organization refuses to do that, their licenses should be revoked. Now, we're talking about just once in every 4 years for DC election and electoral election and so on. Secondly, I was vilified and smeared all the time during an election forum. And people said that Hong Kong will plunge in a disaster if Lam Kwok Hong was elected. I think it all boils down to your way of debate. And I think what's most important is whether people are given equal treatment. Now, lastly, I want to talk about the regulation of the support team. Now, the support team may be making too much noise, and then that would adversely affect the candidates in their speeches. So people can use tactics like asking the support team or the cheering team to make noises when their opponents are speaking. So I think that is something that should be tackled. Fourthly, whether all media organizations should give the same length of time to the candidates. Now, we have a group of TV stations and another group of radio stations. Should they be giving equal time to the candidates? Now, fifthly, if a person or a candidate is in a certain profession and he gets exposure because of his profession, how should that be viewed? Now, in Hong Kong, there is going to be universal suffrage. More people will stand for election. And if an entrepreneur stands for election, he shouldn't be barred from making comments, say, on the business or the economy. So I think we should adopt as much an open an attitude as possible. In Hong Kong, you should never allow people to buy airtime with money. If that is allowed, that's going to create a big problem. Say if list A of candidates just names the political party, and actually, everyone knows what or which people are in the list, and they are, say, buying airtime, then that should be regulated. Now, I think this is an area that you should regulate on. And if you are not going to do that, you are going to allow the very rich businessmen to buy airtime to support certain candidates. Please think about this. Please prohibit people from buying airtime with money. I don't think it's reasonable to ask me to stop writing columns in newspapers because I am standing for election. I don't think that's right. Now, if you allow to give more airtime to more Hong Kong people, like the group carrying Hong Kong Power, then that is going to create a big problem. Next one, Dr. N. Zhang, Chairman. We're now talking about elections today. There are many areas which need to be reviewed. Now, we are focusing on election forum today. So I want to say several things. First, I would like to raise 3 areas of unfairness. In many districts, more and more candidates stand for election. There are as many as 20 lists in some constituencies, and this is not fair to the voters because it will be difficult for them to listen and hear too much in a short span of time. And for some candidates, they just pay a certain fee and they stand for elections. And in election forums, they may be hurling personal attacks at other candidates, at their rivals. And we don't know whether their accusations are true or not. So I think the administration should tackle this. The second area where there is unfairness is that in some election forums, they invite guest hosts, and these hosts often have their own political stance. Take myself as an example. A host once asked me about a book with a description on the history of my ancestors some 60 years ago, and they asked me what my view on that part of history was, and then I didn't know how to answer. And then there were others who gave me 1 minute to talk about Hong Kong's political development. And for other candidates, they just asked some general questions. I don't think it's fair. The third area of unfairness is this. Say you have 10 lists, and then the number 1 list was always the first to answer questions and to raise questions. And sometimes for number 1 it was not fair because the team has not warmed up yet. So I think these are all issues that the administration can conduct a review on.
So, Mr. Lee, please consider those points. Next, Ms. Emily Lau. Mr. Chairman, I think even if you are to spend 10 months on the review, you won't be able to complete it. I think we have to be fair. Let's focus on this particular subject. Many electronic media have been complaining. They say that it's very difficult to organize election forums because there are time constraints. There are people who requested them to organize a 5-hour election forum because there are so many candidates. Of course, election forums cannot be selective. They should not prohibit any candidate from participating. Now, I'd like to know from the Undersecretary whether the media themselves have suggested anything to him. Now, for the nomination threshold, we heard that it will be 100 persons. Is it low enough? Well, sometimes certain people are not really interested in standing for election. So some people say that if the threshold is lifted a bit higher, it may be better. In my constituency, there are 19 teams. You just cannot make out who's who. So it's very difficult to organize election forums. In future, you may have 23 or even 42 lists if you are to implement this new mechanism. Any solution, Under Secretary? Under Secretary, concerning forums, in the past, our media have been very professional. Different candidates were given fair and equal treatment, and they have full freedom of speech. At the same time, we observed that some candidates, their supporters, or members of the public had comments or even complaints about various aspects of election forums. Perhaps in a moment, Mr. Lee can tell members what views were reflected to him when he comes into contact with the media. But basically, I found media able to observe the guidelines. Now, the nomination threshold of 100 people at the moment, by and large, can allow anybody to join the election. So there's a certain degree of difficulties on the part of the media. However, we cannot tighten the threshold too much. We must ensure the right to stand for election. Up to this moment, we've not heard that many suggestions that this threshold of 100 people should be changed. Mr. Chairman, that remark should also be applicable to the CA election. I hope that the Bureau will bear in mind what has just been said by the Under Secretary. Mr. Lee? Mr. Chairman, in the past, the media have been very patient and cooperative with us. They have been providing information to us where and where necessary. Very often, complaints originated from misunderstandings and insufficient communication. Now, very often, the starting point and positions of different parties may be different. Understandings may also vary. Therefore, sometimes for complaints about unfairness or partiality or prejudice, we would transcribe the whole election forum, and normally we did not discover any unfairness. Of course, a certain remark may be considered remarks targeting a particular candidate. In most cases, the dispute could be satisfactorily resolved. Ms. Emily asked whether we kept in sufficient contact with the media. We did carry out public consultation in the past. Concerning the guidelines, the media can always give us views. And then we'll also conduct public consultation between 2015 and 2017. We did receive suggestions from the media. If the guidelines, or if the media feel that the guidelines should be further relaxed, they can make suggestions to the EAC. Mr. To? Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's better to consult the media than to consult us. Just now, some colleagues seem to be suggesting that a forum is fair so long as he or she can answer the questions. Otherwise, the forum is not fair. Of course, if you can answer a question satisfactorily, you'll be able to impress your electors. So whether or not election forums are good, I must say that they're just like two-edged swords. They have merits and demerits. Now, if you have 19 lists in a constituency, after the host reading out the names on the lists, over a minute have already lapsed and the audience will have switched to another channel. You see, according to a survey on YouTube, if a watcher is not satisfied within 8 seconds, he will switch channel. So I think you should discuss with the media to find out a practicable solution. I think in future elections, there is always this possibility of getting more than 20 lists. Watchers may switch channel if they're not satisfied. I recall that when I attended a forum, I was given 10 seconds for my opening remarks. Well, after I said good morning, the 10 seconds would have lapsed already. So it's better not to have that 10 seconds at all, not to waste that 10 seconds at all. The media should give you views. So, Mr. Lee, before the next round of election forums comes along, you should discuss with the media to work out a solution that is both acceptable to the media and to the public. Mr. Chairman, just a comment. Well, amongst all of us here, the Undersecretary has the richest experience in election. But as he is consulting us, we just offer him our views. Now, the experience of other jurisdictions is set out in the Secretariat's paper. However, those information are only related to the election of heads of state. In those elections, they had fewer candidates. So their election forums are very different from ours. Next time, we should have some information about the MP election in the UK. Secondly, as Hong Kong does not have a mature culture of political parties, we're different from the UK. For many years, the UK was unable to organize election forums at Prime Minister elections until the last PM election. So, that's an important factor to consider. In future, candidates should be given more choices. It's good to reach a consensus, but what if a consensus cannot be reached? There should be certain conditions for candidates to observe. Thirdly, fairness in terms of quality is also important, not just fairness in terms of quantity, that is, in terms of time. The objective of some forums is to allow electors to make an informed choice. But then forums have been undermined. It's just like the beauty pageants in Hong Kong. In other jurisdictions, they have very high-quality beauty pageants. But in Hong Kong, beauty pageants are of very low quality, with the beauties being fooled around and played around. So if we are unable to organize high-quality election forums, then it's better not to organize election forums. Otherwise, they will be damaging our electoral culture. As for penalty, the most serious penalty is reprimand only. But then there are no serious consequences. The election would have been over already after a complaint is substantiated. So next time, we must have more stringent requirements for electoral forums, and punishment must be deterrent enough. Fifthly, our public airwaves are not open for procurement. So, election forums organized by the media out of their own initiative are very important. Yes, newspapers are also very forceful. But as some of our colleagues said, the big consortia can do a lot of things. Even before an election campaign starts, some political parties will have spent a great deal of money on publicity. So in order to be fair, you must not restrict election forums to electronic media. You should open up all media, not just electronic media. If you want electors to have the right to know, then election forums are good. But if they turn out to be counterproductive, then we should either ban all election forums, or open up our public airwaves to everybody. Otherwise, such forums will not be able to help the public and help with our democratic movement. And we should take reference from overseas jurisdictions. Dr. Hon from the Library and Research Division of the Secretariat is here. Dr. Hon, any comment on Mr. Porter's remarks? Say those about the Prime Minister election in the UK. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the beginning, we also researched into election forums in overseas jurisdictions and discovered none. There are two possibilities. One is that they might not have any election forum. The other being the fact that they have only very small election forums. Now, our paper is just a reference paper for members. We actually wanted to get more information for members.
So we are just looking at the presidential elections in U.S. and the election of the Prime Minister in Canada, UK, and Australia. And actually, the presidents are not directly elected, and then actually they are elected by members of the parliament. And then the majority party in the parliament, the head of that majority party will serve as the president. So for Canada, Australia, the election forums have to do with the election of the members of parliament. So because they are practicing party politics. So the presidential candidates are debating actually on behalf of their respective political parties so that their parties can get a majority vote and so that they can become the president or the prime minister. Yes, Dr. Priscilla Leung, next, Chairman. I agree with most of what colleagues said today. I think the aim is to really improve the quality of democracy in Hong Kong. And we are going to develop a democratic system in Hong Kong. What kind of political culture we want to have in Hong Kong? Now, in the past few years, and we found that members of the public would finish watching the soccer matches, but they would drop out in the middle of an election forum. Now, once in Kowloon East, 6 candidates joined hands to attack me. They spent 18 minutes, and then when it was my turn to speak for 3 minutes, and then people were hurling shouts at me, and then I could only manage one sentence, please support me. So this is really going too far, and this actually did happen. So this is something that we couldn't stop, but the question is that people of different political persuasions all come to this view that because in our system, a candidate has to pay only $50,000 to enroll in an election, and then it is very open to many people, and the election forums were of poor quality, and people didn't want to watch it or watch them. They would just switch off their television when it came to election forums. People were so frustrated by all these election forums. This is something that we don't want to see. We want to motivate people to have an aspiration for democracy. So we were just standing there like clowns in an election forum. So can we be more proactive in our thinking? Now, I have this suggestion. Media organizations don't want you to impose rules on them. I have this constructive suggestion. Now, for electronic media, and actually, it's very attractive to people when they just pay $50,000 and they have a chance to stand in front of during an election forum on a TV. So, would it be possible, say, to draw lots in finding out or selecting the candidates to speak at election forums? So these election forums, candidates have more time, and then the members of the public can also choose the which candidates they would like to watch. Now, the candidates also have a choice as to which election forum to attend. So, by drawing lots, we can feature different candidates, and also as far as the subjects are concerned, I think we should carry out more in-depth discussions. Now, for electoral elections, the candidates should have a good analytical ability, and for election forums held in the past, the candidates could easily concoct the excuses that they didn't have the time to speak, and that by using that, they could cover up their deficiency in the analytical ability. Now, for some major newspapers, they featured certain candidates in 3 or 4 pages, and I wasn't given the chance to respond. So is this kind of doing or practices healthy? I think it's a retrogression instead. And you would like to people to favor like these kind of election forums and not dislike them. So can we draw up a mechanism where different media organizations can cooperate, and then if if the media organizations are doing it well, the electors and the candidates will like them, these election forums. First round, the last one, Ms. Chen Yinhan. Chairman, I don't think we need a lot of discussion on this topic. We should really leave it up to the media to decide on the issue. I think the society is developing, and I don't think there are any problems with the election forums. Mr. Lee talked about relaxing the guidelines. What options are you left with? Canceling the equal time or what? Mr. Lee, what have you been thinking about? Chairman, there have been views that if one organizes an election forum, all the candidates or lists of candidates should be invited. But say for some constituency or field or sector, there are too many, a large number of candidates, and that puts constraints on the production freedom. There are also views that a broadcaster should be given more freedom to exercise discretion to just invite the more well-known candidates. Or in terms of speaking time, can we do away with the equal time restriction? So these are the views that we have received. Now, in the past, based on the fair and equal treatment principle, we don't see that there are many other options. Here, if we give up the fair and equal treatment, I don't see that there are any options which can be accepted by the candidates and also the voters. So we want to study further on this, whether there is any room for optimization. Now, Ms. Chen Yinhan, I've been in the field for a long time. If you have a criteria for the media, then it will be easier, or else the government will be subject to all sorts of criticisms. I think it's fair that these kind of principles are put in place. Now, I do see that the media organizations have difficulties, but you can listen to what kind of suggestions they have for you. But I don't think we should depart from these two principles, fairness and equality. Of course, we would give you our views too. I think you can't do away with the two principles, fairness and equality. And it will be sort of open to all sorts, you will be subject to all sorts of criticisms if you do away with these two principles. But I do agree that media organizations encounter a lot of difficulties in holding election forums. Please listen to them. Yes. First round, Mr. Nang Sing. Thank you, Chairman. In the last few elections, I heard views that there was too much noise or shouts during the election forum, and that might not be good. So I think the government should do something about this. Now, I have a few suggestions. First, the host or the moderator, his caliber and his stance affects very often the hosting style, speaking time, and so on. The complaints in this regard should be well looked into, and whether the administration should draw up criteria for the caliber or the stance of the moderators. So if there are too many complaints against a certain moderator, then the AC should ban that person from serving as moderator again. Now, we don't have a mechanism which can serve that, but I think we should come up with such a mechanism, or else the election on the whole will be affected. Secondly, each election will trigger complaints. So can you come up with a summary of all the content of the complaints? Say, can you devise a mechanism whereby when one person speaks, the mic of the other people in the room will be shut off? Would that be something you can look into? And I think that sort of arrangement is important for an election forum. Now, also on advertisements. Well, I think the fairness principle should come in. Now, if you have good support, and if you impose, and it's important, you impose a ceiling on the advertisement expenditure. So, administration, do you have any response on these viewpoints? On your first point about the caliber or stance of the moderators, I've heard your views. I will go back and listen and consider. Now, about the complaints. After we have handled all the complaints, we will come up with a summary internally, and that also forms a basis for us to draw up future guidelines on elections. So this is something that we're working on. Now, as for election advertisements, the administration has a certain set of policy. For the EAC, we don't have a particular stance. Whether there are election advertisements or not, we still abide by the principle of fairness and equality. Okay, any other member in the first round? Gary Fan. I didn't mean to speak, but then I wanted to respond to what Mr. Leung Sing said, and it's also a follow-up point on Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Now, in Hong Kong, there is no majority party, and we don't have a party law. Now, if we are to go on a par with other jurisdictions, and we allow the candidates to buy airtime, I just want to tell the administration that this should not be allowed, because this will create great unfairness. Now, after the 2012 political reform package, we've added 5 super seats, and there was discussion on the fact that there may be a high advertising expenditure, and that would create unfairness to the small political parties or candidates in the minority. Now, if we are going to allow candidates to buy airtime and without the relevant corresponding political mechanism, then this should not be allowed at all, in my view. Now, I think it's better if the administration buys airtime from the commercial broadcasters and then distribute it for use by the candidates in a fair and equal manner. Then that would be good, and then the candidates can use these for airtime to present their election platforms. And I think that should make up for shortfalls, as we identified in our discussion just now on the election forums. Because in these election forums, they couldn't present their election platforms clearly. So this is my suggestion for the administration. So the meeting will end at 4:30. Anyone else for the first round? If not, then Dr. Priscilla Lang, second round. So I will be brief. I would like to add one point.
Well, I heard Mr. Leung Sing's suggestion. Well, I should say this. Considering advertisements, I believe the government should keep an open mind. I do not belong to a major political party. Just now, I described my experience in some election forums. Maybe it's good to allow candidates to place advertisements, Mr. Gary Fan's suggestion is also good. That is, to ask the government to purchase certain airtime. The government should consider that suggestion. It shouldn't close its doors so quickly. In past election forums, there was just no time for certain candidates to respond. So it's good to purchase TV airtime. Well, some candidates may spend more on the electronic media and less on pamphlets. That's all I want to add, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Gary Fan. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to respond to Dr. Priscilla Leung. If we are allowed to place electoral advertisements, I don't think I can agree with Dr. Priscilla Leung that that would be conducive to healthy interaction. Just look at Taiwan and the United States. Some candidates did take out electronic advertisements. In the end, they were engaged in mutual smearing. As a result, the electors became insensitive to elections. So I think we'd better work on our system. We should have a party law. We should require party laws to fully disclose the sources of their funds. We must have a matching political culture. Otherwise, election forums may still be platforms for smearing. So it's not as simple as allowing candidates to place advertisements, because advertisements may still be full of smearing. Every remark of a candidate should be fully examined by the electors. Mr. Charles Mock. Originally, I did not intend to speak, but after listening to the last two speakers on TV advertisements, I'd like to say a few words about this. I have to hurry to another room for another meeting. I very much agree with Mr. Gary Fan. I don't want to repeat him. Given the present political culture, it's not suitable to allow candidates to place political advertisements or electoral advertisements. Otherwise, rich people and rich political parties can, at all expenses, publicize their political parties or candidates in electronic advertisements. Before we have a party law, that will only lead to more problems. So I don't want to repeat what Mr. Gary Fan said. I just want to say that I very much agree with him. All right, different views were expressed. Time's up. Last item on the agenda, any other business? Any other business? No? Our next meeting will be held on the 20th of May at 2:30 p.m. Thank you very much for attending.